Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure and honor to be able to speak in front of such a distinguished audience. Um, Unfortunately, that's only virtual, but I'm sure that there will be some opportunities in the futures to interact lively and even perhaps cooperate on some specific project. I would like to thank the organizers, UKM and MIRA, for the invitation. And I'm also especially grateful to the Malaysian government for their support in fostering understanding and knowledge within the industry. So my presentations title indicates that I'll be talking about trade barriers, but also strategies to promote industrial hemp in international markets. I will talk about some insights from a recent report published by UNCTAD on industrial hemp, and that should help actually framing and provide insights to discussions about the most appropriate strategy to set up in a specific context, which is the context of any country. There is great potential in Malaysia to develop such a sector, and it's important that the government get some interest into the sector and is also trying to promote it as much as possible. So I will start by telling the reasons why UNCTAD decided to write a report on industrial hemp. That may not sound that logical, but considering that part of the mandate of UNCTAD is to promote a sustainable exploitation and use of commodities, well, that could have made sense, and it made even more sense considering the multiple properties of industrial hemp that can be seen as a potential component of a sustainable agriculture policies, able to integrate both mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So we saw industrial hemp as a SDGs fully compatible crop, and that's why we decided to dig a bit further. However, and despite the decisions taken back in December 2020 by the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs to delete cannabis and cannabis resin from Schedule 4, the most restrictive ones of the 1961 Convention or Single Convention or C61. Well, despite that, industrial hemp remains a controversial crop. So the main objective of the UNCTAD reports on industrial hemp was to inform policymakers and the general public also about the true potentialities of industrial hemp and possibly also erode the stigma around it. From an institutional point of view, well, the motivation of writing a report on industrial hemp was linked to the fact that synergies, partnerships with other international organizations such as the UN Regional Economic Commissions, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, or even UN Habitat, well, could be promoted and has to be promoted. So we are working on that at the moment. Things are taking the time they need to take, but we are moving forward slowly. I will start with a preamble about, well, the position of industrial hemp, the appreciations, the perception of industrial hemp in the international drug control system. This is crucial to be able to justify also the promotion of the sector. So in the conventions that compose the system that has to do with international drug control, there is a clear textual distinctions between the cannabis sativa lineus plants grown for the production of drugs, so those really falling under the scope of the treaties, and exempting those grown for any other purpose. So if we look at the articles of the single convention, the C61, well, we'll see that in the article 11C, the definition of cannabis plants refers only to cannabis plants used for the production and manufacture of drugs. And if we then turn to the official commentary published by the UN Secretary General's office, well, we see there that, well, there's some precisions made about the interpretation of the articles of the C61, and in particular that the control regimes of these conventions and the others that comes to frame the international drug control system. Well, these control regimes applies only to the cultivation of the C-sativa plants for the production of cannabis and cannabis resins. So the drugs, that's the definition, drugs present in the schedules. So as a consequence, the cultivation of for any other purpose, and not only for the purposes mentioned in paragraph 2 of the C61, that is industrial purposes, horticultural purposes, breeding, fiber and seeds, well, any other purpose but the manufacture of drugs is exempted from the control regime provided for in Article 23 of the C61. What does that mean? Well, it means that the definition provided by the industrial hemp sector is fully consistent with the international drug control system framework. This definition states that a cannabis sativa plant or any part of the plant, and that's crucial, in which the concentration of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, in the flowering and fruiting tops is less than the regulated maximum level as established by authorities having jurisdictions. So hemp extracts or hemp products should be defined as products of preparation derived from industrial hemp, and so that should not fall under the scope of the international conventions. That means that all parts of the plants, as long as they are not manufacturers use, transform for some illicit purposes, drug uses, can be fully exploited, and their exploitation would be consistent with the international drug control system. That said, we can now move to the main messages of the report and how they relate to the establishment of strategies to promote industrial hemp products in international markets. Those main messages can be grouped in 3 different parts. The first one has to deal with the strong potentials. I mean, the report recognized the strong potentials of the plant. There is a large set of hemp-based products that can be actually produced, and all parts of the plant can be used and processed. I mean, that's part really of the properties of the plant itself. Even the roots can be used. So in that context, that also means that, well, there are several options that can be offered to countries to promote the sector. And they can actually consider different value chains depending on the local conditions, so the economic, social, environmental, etc. ones. So that means that a whole plant approach can and should be considered, and that can be done in all parts of the world. I mean, obviously, not all value chains would make sense to be developed in different parts of the world, in different countries, but by promoting an whole plant approach, that is an approach that would actually facilitate the exploitation and processing of all parts of the plants, well, countries should be able to identify those supply chains, value chains, production chains that are best suited for the local conditions. So thanks to its botanical characteristics and multiple agronomic properties, hemp can be and should be considered a natural component of sustainable agricultural strategies, as mentioned previously. I mean, sustainability should be also amongst the major objectives of the policies and strategies put in place to actually promote and develop the sector. So hemp appears to be, because of the characteristics, also a natural candidate for the establishment of national, but also regional value chains, depending on the respective comparative advantage of the various entities. If we now look at, well, the market, the international market potentials, well, as far as industrial hemp is concerned, and based on information that is available, which might not be still fully exhaustive, well, we do see that trade flows of industrial hemp products face in general relatively low tariffs as compared to any other agricultural products, and that's something to be taken into consideration. We do observe some tariff escalation, though. Tariff escalation means that the more processed products may actually face higher tariffs. And if we look at the data, well, we'll find that the tariffs, despite the fact that they remain relatively low as compared to any other products, agricultural, but also manufactured ones, well, we find that, well, more processed products such as yarn will be facing higher tariffs, but that is still manageable. Obviously, if we want to get full appreciations of the prevailing international market conditions, market access conditions, well, we also have to look at the non-tariff measures, NTMs. And there we do find that, well, the incidence and prevalence of NTMs exist systematically on both imports and also exports. So we do have non-tariff measures regulating international trade flows. Some of these measures are generic ones and apply to any type of agricultural products, but some are specific to end products, and these have to do essentially with the THC content, either in raw materials or in more processed ones. Obviously, some of these measures can have very restrictive impact on trade flows, on export potential, as they may involve some laboratory testing. So while trying to promote also the exports of products from the sectors, government should also take that into considerations. We also observe some kind of escalation in the applications of non-tariff measures on industrial hemp-related products. So we have more NTMs, so that could be sanitary, phytosanitary measures or technical barriers to trade. So we have more of them imposed on more advanced processed products, again, such as yarn, as compared to raw fiber products. On the potential side, well, we also observe an increase in global awareness amongst final consumers about hemp products because they are considered to be more consistent with more sustainable consumption habits. So this is increasing, and that opens the door to increasing international demand in the forthcoming years. However, well, we must keep in mind that for the time being, most hemp-related final good markets remain relatively small. And most markets for hemp products can still be considered as niche markets. And this has implications also in the establishment of a strategy, in the sense that a niche market is associated with a specific market dynamics that may affect price evolution significantly and eventually profitability. So those characteristics include the risk of oversupply due to supply side or demand side shocks. That's the case of CBD products in the USA market. There's clearly another situation of oversupply, despite the fact that demand has been increasing in the recent years. Well, the production is still ahead of it. And obviously, this has had a catastrophic impact on prices for those products, meaning that, well, profitability is also put at a risk in that situation. That's why we have seen production of hemp in the USA decrease substantially between 2019, 2020, and the most recent years. Niche markets are also characterized by heterogeneous product quality that makes those products not necessarily full perfect substitutes for other competing products, and that may also raise the issue of consumer protection. So in a development strategy for the sector, the quality dimension and the standardizations of this quality should also be taken into consideration and should also be actually promoted. So that was for the potentials. Now, amongst the main message and that must be taken into account when defining and optimal strategies for the development of the sector and eventually for its competitiveness on international markets, well, we must have to deal with regulatory treatment of the plant, which is still constraining in most part of the world. So if we want to promote the whole plant approach, which is the best approach to make sure that the full potentiality of the plant can be actually made available to the sectors and to producers and processors, well, if we want this whole plant approach to be implemented, well, we need an appropriate regulatory framework. As I mentioned, in many countries, there is still an impediment to the full exploitations of hemp plants potentials in their many uses. For instance, we will find in some countries that well, flowers cannot be exploded and should be even burned directly. So if you're considering the sustainability of the plant from a CO2 emissions point of view, well, a plant which is naturally CO2 negative, which is sequestrating and absorbing more CO2 than it's producing, well, if you impose the burning of the flowering tops, well, then clearly this dimension will be totally affected and will not necessarily make the plant accountable for a real sustainable dimension. So that means that it's necessary in the very first place for the legislator to define clearly non-intoxicant uses and products. This definition should preferably be based on robust empirical scientific evidence. So for instance, well, the maximum amount of THC in the flowering tops and leaves should be defined, but it should be defined by also accounting for the prevailing climatic conditions. We know that a period of intense heat will necessarily increase the THC content of these flowering tops. So if you impose a very low level like 2%, which is imposed in many northern hemisphere countries, if you impose that in a climate which tends to be hotter than the one that you're facing in the northern hemisphere, well, that may impose a very severe constraints on producers. So that's why an approach towards allowing a 1% content of THC is likely to be adopted by many countries in the southern hemisphere. You should also deal with the maximum amount of THC in feed products, food products, and extracts. That's also important, not to actually completely avoid the possibility of using also the flooring tops for other purposes than, for instance, the production of biochar. So the definition of this amount should also be based on past experiences, current experiences in the various countries, and also traditional practices. So the non-intoxicant uses and products would certainly have to be associated with a precise set of cannabis sativa L varieties. That's the case in the EU, for instance, or in the USA. But the fact that, well, some specific climatic conditions and agronomic characteristics may prevail, different ones may prevail in different parts of the world, breeding should be promoted to identify the most adequate plant varieties and cultivars. So it might be acceptable at the beginning of the development of the sector to identify varieties essentially grown in the northern hemisphere, for instance, as the authorized varieties, but well, breeding should also be promoted. So we would, growers and processors would be able to actually plant those varieties that are the best adapted to the prevailing local conditions. So the growing and processing of varieties recognized as non-intoxicants by the legislator should not be monitored by drug control related institutions or governmental entities. That's also an important part of the strategies that is really aiming at promoting the sector. So hemp is not a drug plant, and should not be considered as such. So anything which has to do with the delivery of licenses to grow the plant should go through, for instance, the ministry that has to deal with agriculture, or an entity which has to deal with agriculture directly, and not a drug control one. That's also a crucial point to be kept in mind. So these are the main insights from the report, and we do see them as insights that can be and should be used to define a strategy to develop the sector which is the most adapted to the local conditions. Now, the way forward also from an UNCTAD perspective, so it's not that we want this report to be an achievement per se. We want to move forward and use it as a basis for the development of further projects, hopefully with the request of UNCTAD member states, and that's part of the way forward. We have also recently published a policy brief, and this policy brief can be seen really as the voice of UNCTAD on the matter, and we do hope that will provide some incentives for governments to move forward on the development of the sector. So the way forward, basically, let's start by the second point, which is really the willingness to raise awareness about hemp potentials amongst UNCTAD members and in particular developing countries. And UNCTAD is here to help them with their willingness to establish some strategies to develop the sector. Unfortunately, it's not that we have available funds that can be spent on those strategies, but we can certainly participate in framing those strategies, bringing the skills and expertise and connections we've been building around the report and the policy brief. Now, there's also another effort that UNCTAD wants to make is to try to help filling the current data information gap in international data sets. I mean, there is clearly an underestimation of trade flows. Only very limited number of hemp-related products are part of the international classifications used to collect trade flows, which is the harmonized system classifications. There's only 3 of them. And if we only look at these 3 products, which are raw hemp, fiber hemp, let's say, and yarn, well, we will find that trade flows are about $15 million, which is not really significant as compared to any other crops. But now, if we look a bit deeper into the national classifications, well, this amount would be at least multiplied by 6, if not 7. And here we do not account anything which has to do with CBD products. And there, obviously, I mean, if we include them, I mean, the value would be even further multiplied. So there's an effort to be made to account a bit more precisely about all hemp-based products that may be traded. There is nothing in international data sets about, I mean, dealing with a trade, for instance, about seeds or seed oil, which may represent a very high value part of the market. So we're working on this as well. We are also trying to involve the FAO to get a better estimation of cultivated areas and productions of raw products. We do find some divergence between officials and industries estimates, and that's also something that should be accounted for, and also trying to raise the awareness there. Finally, and that's in line with what I've been talking about during the whole presentation, while we do make some efforts to try to define appropriate sectoral strategies best adapted to local realities, and also, and that's also important, consistent with the global demand trends and also the competitions that exist on the different markets. The idea here is really to avoid high profitability traps like the CBD ones, because, well, there's clearly a high value market there, but because it's a high value, and high value is often associated with a high profitability, high margins, well, there's a lot of competitions, and that may not be the route to be followed, at least at the beginning. We may want to consider other type of products such as construction materials, which is an extremely promising sector, because that would provide the inputs to develop also sustainable urban development plans. That's something that must be considered in developing countries, and that's something we want to promote. I mean, clearly, if such urban development plans are established all around the world, well, there will be high demand for this type of products, and the trade potential is clearly there. And what is also clear is that economic, environmental, and social sustainability should be promoted along the whole value chain, along all value chains and all parts of these different value chains. And that's something we are considering here at UNCTAD as well. Obviously, well, the best way to learn is to practice. So once again, I mean, what is important for us is that there is some return from UNCTAD member states to call for some partnership, some advice, some involvement from the institution. That's crucial. Another last point, there will be an addendum to the current report, and that should be published by September, in September this year. And that will have to do essentially with an update of the production and trade information, with trade information trying to be as exhaustive as possible. So the efforts we are making now is really to go into national classifications and check whether there is some product lines that have to do directly with industrial hemp. And I will stop here again. I really regret not to be able to interact at least online with you, but I do hope that this will happen in the future, and I'm sure that will happen. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email. And I really wish you a fruitful and successful forum. And again, congratulations for this initiative. Bye.